We're live now.
Yeah, I would say the worst that could happen is nobody can hear us. So if you're watching in chat, let us know, can you hear it? We can hear each other, but I don't know whether anyone else can hear. So
I'm sure I know the wife and granddaughter are watching.
yeah, I think Sanders says yes. So to everyone watching, this is Alan, and I'm going to attempt your last name, Loizeaux.
Correct. Loizeaux.
All right, correct. All right, cool. So, usually when we have these kinds of streams where we just talk about the hobby and whatnot, one of the first questions that always comes up is what got you into the hobby? But I think what got you into the hobby is pretty self-evident in the background. So this is your father's layout, right?
Yes. Well, my father is well devoted into the S scale community. Ever since I was, 5 years old, I remember helping him, work on his layout. This is actually the third version of the layout, much bigger, double main line, but it's all S scale. Of course, my dad is the big reason why I'm into model trains. Ever since I was a kid, I had my Lionel, I had my HO, I dabbled in S scale, I'm typical kid. I had every type of layout there was. Under the bed, folding off the walls. Then parents went away for the weekend. When they came back, there was around the room layout. Bolted to the wall.
Has there ever been a period of time where you stepped away from the hobby or have you always been involved in the hobby?
Well, I've always been involved in the hobby, but I did 22 years serving the Uncle Sam in the Army. And so my model railroading kind of took a giant, pause during that time. But with a great wife, hi, Sandy, with a great wife, she's been very supportive of the hobby. And, we bought the house and the first thing she said is, okay, that area down there is yours. You can, put your trains down there. And so, I got my spot in the house. I don't need to go out, leave the house to, shore the cars or fly the airplanes or, anything. So I can just stay at home, and it's convenient. When she wants me, stomp 3 times on the floor and I come upstairs. Sure, there's an old song, something about that.
Yeah, it sure is. So you yourself, you model ON30?
I personally model an ON30. But I kind of tell everybody it's ON30, but to me it's more scaled towards ON3. I've been able to get ON30 rolling stock and locomotives that's more towards the ON3 typical, Denver Rio Grande Western style. And I just happened to find a Mountain Model Imports on eBay, won a couple of bids really quick, and it's perfect. Mountain Model Imports, they make ON3 and ON30, just a different wheel sets. And the difference is with ON30, I was able to get tighter radiuses for my corners. I've got my little area, and I can get it down to 30 inches for the K27, K28s. But on my main line, it's 38 inches will handle the 36 and 37s just fine. But that's why I chose ON30 versus ON3. Is the center drivers are blind, and I can get the radius that I need for what I want.
So is there a reason why you chose O instead of S, since you were already, kind of in the S world?
Well, when I left the military, I retired out in 2008. I immediately started buying anything HO scale that I can find that was, something I thought I would use. And I quickly realized that I wasn't going to be able to have the space or, HO just wasn't going to give me what I wanted because I wanted it all and I couldn't have it all. And a good friend of mine is into garden scale, narrow gauge garden scale. And he said, less is more. And I agree with him. My eyesight's not getting any better. So I decided to go with, I was going to go into ON3, but then ON30 came up with the rolling stock and the locomotives I actually wanted. So I made a choice and went ON30. I literally boxed up all the HO stuff, still in its original containers, took it down to my local model railroader club that I know the president as a personal friend. And I said, here's a donation, one-time lifetime gift, do whatever you want with it. And they sold off most of it internally in their club. They took some down to the train show and they kittied up all the money and put that into the club layout. So I made a donation roundabout, towards the club layout, and it's doing quite well. It's very well.
Cool. So I guess a transition into the next question is, what made you decide that you would want to turn your hobby into a business?
Oh, that one's easy. Larry Morton, S-Scaler, owned a company called Tamalco, and I may get this all wrong. So those of you listening in, don't freak out. I might be a little bit off on all the wording, but he used to own Tamalco, which specialized in S gauge, both the scale and high rail turnouts. And there was a round robin open house with the local train club. And Larry popped in at the very end to see how the attendance was. And he just looked at me dead in the eye and says, I'm selling the company. Do you want to buy it? And just off guard. And, we went back and forth about 3 weeks, how to run the company. I'm scared, financially don't know. And, eventually I just told him, I cannot buy your company at this time. And someone else bought the company, for twice what he was asking for. And, and so it's like, I knew, okay, I'm not buying or making S-scale turnouts. But then I kind of thought about it, and it's like, I could do this. I'm just scared. I got onto YouTube. I looked at how to start a small business. What are the pros? What are the cons? The taxes, just how to start. And I got onto Facebook, got onto my ON30 chat groups and just said, hey, does anybody want turnouts? If I've got the fixtures, for all the turnouts, just tell me what you want. We'll work out a fair price. And, within days I had an order, and then I had another order. Then people got to review my ON30 turnouts, and then word of mouth started spreading extremely quick. And I started, having sales just in ON30. I figured, well, this is good. Let me see what I can do, what else I can do. And so I got on the internet. I looked up, custom model railroad turnouts, just open-ended. And quite a bit, there was a lot of information, a lot of websites, but a lot of the websites were either outdated or there was just no response. And so I thought to myself, well, there's a market, because there's not a lot of response on these websites. I'm not naming any websites specifically, but a majority of them were just dead ends. And so I said, oh, well, let me try this. So I got into the S-Scale Facebook groups, and I said, hey, I'm going to build some turnouts. Who wants some? And I had orders, and I got orders, and then the S-Scale orders kept coming and coming and coming. And I said, okay, it's time to go legit. This is a big business opportunity. Went completely legit, got all the lawyers involved, 100% legit, running it like a business. And now I'm, pushing out products in ON30, ON3, ON2, HON3, S-Scale, S high rail. I'm just got back from the O Scale West in California, and now I'm going to start opening up to the O Scale 2-rail guys. I've got a consignment job for a very complex N scale pieces of track, and everyone's happy with the product so far. Now, I saw your comments, and I heard your comments, and I listened to your comments about some areas that need to get addressed. And we had a phone conversation before the video. And yes, I do agree that there is some room for improvements. And believe me, there are easy fixes on my end.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me ask you that. What was I correct? Had you built a bunch of HO were your tools new? Fairly new?
I do not build HO. I do not build HO scale.
Well, I mean the narrow gauge, yeah.
Well, I have tooling for, I'm heavily invested in fast tracks, heavily.
Right.
I have all the tooling necessary for all the different rail codes. And if I need to buy a fixture, I just, open up the checkbook and buy a fixture. I know that I'm going to get return on investment. That's not an issue. The problem that I have, especially with the HON3 that I sent you, and this has been fixed, so it's not going to be a reoccurring problem, is that I simply just have a pair of freight car trucks that I run through the turnout with my finger. Well, you said that it was recommended to have a full-size steam engine, to run through it to really check for the track gauges to make sure that everything is right. Simple fix, got it. Purchases have been made. So, that idea is well listened to, because I'm just looking at HON3 is maybe an inch from wheel to wheel, whereas it
scales out 3 foot 8 inches, something like that in scale.
Whereas like a K36, the wheelbase is much longer. It acts differently going through the turnout. So I've made a purchase, to improve on the quality control aspect of the turnouts that I'm making.
Yeah.
You were my guinea pig, and I absolutely appreciate the hard truth on what's right and what's wrong. If I don't know what's wrong, I can't make improvements.
Oh, well, and I was very impressed when you hit me back after we talked about it, that a mark of a true professional is I can't improve without feedback, and anybody who doesn't listen to feedback is destined to have problems. So yeah, I was very impressed with that. So
I don't want to have the same problem over and over again.
Right.
You look at any of the mass-produced turnouts that are on the market, every single one of them has a flaw that is either known ahead of time or it raises its ugly head 5 years down the road. Right. Every single one of them has its known flaws. They're easy to fix, but after the turnout's been installed and it's 5 years later, it's kind of hard to tear it out and fix it. Whereas I've kind of improved on the printed circuit board turnouts or the fast tracks method. I just made some minor improvements to it to make it easier for the person to install. Those wires on the bottom, everybody at the trade shows looks at them and just goes, I've never thought of that. It's so easy. Yep. Flat copper wire. It's a secret. And I use it for hinge joints. I don't know if we're going into that way later in the conversation, but I use that flat copper wire for hinge points. Oh. Super simple, super reliable, bulletproof. But it's something that no one has thought of. And it's just something, I always look at something and critique it and what can be done better. And then just search for something, anything, and just go for it.
Yeah, very, very cool. So since you've started the business, how do you balance the business with the hobby? I've heard lots of other people who have turned their hobby into the business. They're like, I don't have a hobby anymore. Is that working for you, or are you content with that aspect of it, or what? Do you have a long-term goal of eventually I'm going to give it all up and build the railroad then, or what's going on with the balance?
There is balance. It's heavily persuaded towards family first. Okay, I have a full-time job with the railroad as a conductor. However, I'm always on the extra board, so I got time at the house, just sitting around waiting on the phone call. Well, I can either watch a lot of Otter Creek Rio Grande videos or do something with my life. So I have the hobby room, and from roughly 2 years ago, when Larry Morton said, "Do you want to buy my company?" I haven't touched my personal hobby room since that day. It's exactly the same. And I've gone full blown, and all my spare time is towards the company. And I don't, I'm not down there, 24 hours a day. It's not a full-time job. My customers know that, I have a regular job. I got a family, and when I go downstairs, I'm downstairs for 8-10 hours at a time, just working on orders. There is a balance, but it's like when I'm ready to go downstairs, I'm downstairs for 10 hours minimum, just working on orders. And with a supportive wife, she reminds me constantly, like, I like to spend time with my wife. When I was with the Army, we had a lot of time apart. So I like to spend time with her because, we're not getting any younger, and, I can't buy time. So I like to spend it with the wife. Yeah. And she reminds me politely, don't you have stuff to do for your customers? Don't you have to get for the next train convention? You got to do this. And it's like, okay, baby, when you go to bed, I'm going to go downstairs, get my cup of coffee, and, 10 o'clock at night, I'm going downstairs, and, I come back up at 6 o'clock in the morning to see her off to work. And then if I got, if I'm not going to get a phone call from work, I just go back downstairs. And,
so then your workshop is your workshop is in the basement in the layout room, or are there two separate spaces?
I've got it all started off as an office downstairs, and with family moving in and moving out, my office downstairs has now been moved upstairs, because now I got my spare bedroom back. So my office is upstairs. Well, I decided to take, the space downstairs and use that for, a workbench. Instead of having stuff on the table in the family room, now I can have everything in the office area as a workbench. That's transitioned to, that room is nothing but Empire Trackworks. From corner to corner, it's all company. And, every spare inch of that place has something to do with the company, whether it's, and then off to the side of that area, is the actual, downstairs garage with all the power tools. And that's directly below the master bedroom. And I go in there and I use the belt sander and, to make, file the points and get everything just right. And I asked the wife, does that bother you? She's like, I don't hear it. It doesn't bother me at all. So I'm turning on the belt sander at 2 o'clock in the morning without fear of the wife, raising hell with me. So managing my time, I put a lot of time into, family. Of course, I got to go to work when they call me. Then my spare time is downstairs. I've got 3 grandkids that live, extremely close by. Hi, Natasha. I know you're staying up late just to watch this. But I would like to see the company go strong, where when, in a couple of years, figure 10 years maximum, I can hand the company off to the 3 of them, and they can manage it, and they can take it as far as they want. That's my end goal, is have fun, give back to the community. If someone's just got a regular question, I'll give you a regular answer, to help you. I'm not out here to make, tons of profit. I'd rather just have, help the community grow. And that's where we're at. That's what I do.
Yeah. I had a question and I kind of lost it. It's right here. Concerning the turnouts, did you have a lot? I presumed you built the turnouts prior to deciding to make the company, right? I mean, you had a number of turnouts under your belt already, right? Okay. About how many did you build before you got started? Before you thought, I could absolutely make this a business? Because I think I'm at that point now where I think I could make a turnout for somebody else if they didn't mind the glob solder. But how long have you been making your own turnouts?
Well, I started off with the pencil soldering iron like everybody else. My first turnout was absolutely horrible, but functional.
Mine was too.
And I think I was maybe 3 or 4 turnouts of practice before I actually, said good enough, put it on the layout. And I got maybe 30, 35 turnouts under my belt, and they've all been, working flawlessly. And it was just, well, if I can do it for myself, how hard can it be for someone else? And it wasn't really a hard decision. It was a little nervous, okay, I'm doing this for myself, but now I'm sending it out to other people. The 0-30 guys, not a question. Everything worked great. S-scale, not a problem. Everything worked great. On the company website, I do have comments on there, and I encourage comments. I want the comments, the good, the bad, and the ugly on my product. Like you mentioned, if I don't know of a deficiency, I can't make improvements. And every customer is afforded the opportunity to give me their comments, and with their permission, I post it on the website. And I look forward to comments. I mean, I'm not just here to take your money and give you something that's I think is just good enough. No, I want you to have fun with it. I mean, a model railroad is supposed to be fun, and track work is right next to bench work. It's the most important part. And if you don't have it right, it just makes the hobby miserable and terrible. Well, I want to provide a quality product that's going to make it fun and enjoyable and a little bit more relaxing. I'm just here to help.
Yeah. So how do you get the really clean solder joints? I look at your solder joints and I'm like, I'm not sure what's going on there. I damn sure couldn't do that.
The first thing with any solder joint is clean. The second thing is you got to have really good heat transfer. If both parts aren't getting hot, the solder is not going to flow. So with each piece of rail that I pull out of the package, first it gets wiped down with alcohol, and then the bottom of the rail, I take 100 grit sandpaper and just run it back and forth a couple of times just to give a little bit of an etch onto the bottom of the rail. PC ties, I clean them up, file the gaps. Then I just stick it on the file and just give it a couple of swipes just to clean it up. And if that's not good enough, then I got a little piece of 100 grit sandpaper, just run it over there and, it cleans it up, gets any residue, oxidation off of it. So everything is clean. Put that into the Fast Tracks fixture or jig, whatever you want to call it. I put it in the fixture, and I've noticed that sometimes there's a really good connection between the rail and the PC tie, and other times there's not. I think that's just a byproduct of Fast Tracks changing their PC ties, especially the thickness, because it used to be like a really thick tie. Now it's a little bit thinner tie. but they haven't upgraded the machinery code to cut the fixtures correctly, to adjust for that change in tie thickness. Not a big deal. Not a big deal. You've got the magic tool right there in your hand. Hold it up at the flat copper wire. Dennis, you got that copper wire there? Yeah, that stuff right there off of Amazon. If you want the link, I can get it to you. Just look up flat copper wire, 1 millimeter. There's 2 rolls of that in a package. I think it's like $15-16.
Super cheap.
If there's not good contact between the rail and the PC tie, I just cut off a snip of that flat copper wire, put it underneath the PC tie, which raises it up just a little bit, and that gives me all the contact I need. And then as far as then the pencil soldering iron will work just fine. But I knew that I was going to be doing this a lot, so I upgraded to a resistance soldering iron, the 250 watt one, and I really have to tone the wattage down so I'm not applying too much heat where the PC tie is just melting. But I get everything, I figure out where the comfort zone is, make sure a little bit of flux, apply the heat. I got a little foot pedal so I can turn it on and off.
Do you tin the PCB tie first?
No. I make sure it's clean. I put some water-based flux on it. And then the water-based paste flux, I put a little bit on it, just a thin layer. Don't glob it up. That's just a waste of material. Just a little thin layer. Put everything together, hit it with the resistance soldering iron, and when I know it's hot enough, I basically just take in the solder 60-40, normal 60-40 solder, but the thinnest solder I can find, thin solder, and I simply just make sure that
mine is.
I think I'm using like 0.02 millimeter solder. I just get it off of Amazon.
That's what I did too. 0.02 is what this is. Yeah.
Yeah. And I figured out that I can apply the heat and just barely touch the tip of the solder and just drag it along the bottom of the rail. And that's it. But I keep the heat applied and I watch the other side. It'll draw the solder underneath the rail. If you're applying solder, and then you see it come out the other side of the rail, you've applied twice as much as you need. So that's just a matter of, figuring out the amount of heat and how much solder. Now I'm dealing with, code 40, code 55, 70, 83, 100, 125, 138, and 148 rail. They all need different amount of solder.
Right. And I'm sure different amount of heats as well.
Oh yeah. That's why I stepped up
between
to 250
and in scale.
Yeah, that's why I stepped up to the 250 because it'll take care of that 148 rail. But after I kind of get the solder to flow where I need it, I can hold it there with the tweezers and I let it cool down. I don't just take the heat away. I let it cool down while I'm holding it. Sometimes you can just put a piece of wood on top and hold it and remove the soldering pencil. In my case, I got the tweezers and I just turn the heat off and I just hold it. Too often, I've learned that if I take the heat away, everything is still retaining that heat and it'll keep the solder soft and just get out of gauge and not hold where you want it to. But that's the first part of making sure that you got a good, clean solder joint. The second part is there's a little scraper tool. If I know there's a little extra solder on there, I just scrape it off. I just do a good job. Yep, I got that one. That works. And next time you're at the dentist, ask them for some old dental picks.
I used to be a key and tool guy at work, and one of our job responsibilities was to, what's the word I'm looking for, destroy anything that came out of dental so an inmate couldn't get it and turn it into a shank. So I've got plenty of dental picks.
Yes. Those work great too. like getting into the frog areas. And the wire brush that Fast Track sells, you can pick one up at Harbor Freight just as easy. Get the ones with the steel bristles, not the brass ones. The steel is a little bit stronger, and just scrub it. Just scrub it. Don't be afraid. You're not going to hurt it. Just scrub that joint clean, both sides of the rail, and that pretty much gets everything. And then I just, the wife, hey, honey, don't listen to this next part. But I go to the dishwasher, throw everything in the dishwasher, and run a cycle on it, and that the water clears out all the excess flux space, gets rid of it, cleans everything up, and it's not a problem.
And you use water-based, right? You don't use
water-based. Simple.
Water-based. Yeah, I need to get some of that.
Everyone has their own skills as far as soldering. Find the product that works for you. Find the product that you're comfortable with. If you're using acid-based, okay, there's a different process to neutralize it. I'm comfortable with water-based, and it works for me. And I just stick everything in the dishwasher, let it run a cycle, and it gets everything nice and clean. Just gets rid of all the excess stuff, all the fingerprint oils, gone, just gone. And then I pull it out and hang it up on a string outside. Just let it air dry. I just let it air dry, and I come back to it 20 minutes later. It's dry. It's done. Go downstairs to the next phase or the next step that's on it, and just start working on it. Cowboy Valley, hello out there, Timberline Junction, Monroe. 3-way turnouts yet? No, I have not physically made a HON3 3-way turnout, but I've done ON30, I've done ON3, and I've done SN3 3-way turnouts, and I have all the tools to make an HON3 turnout. So it's just next on the line to do for someone. PC tie is a PC tie, rail is a rail. Just how far apart do I make the rails? So that's the only difference I have.
Yeah, I'll just say that in my opinion, of course, the fixture that they have now might be different than one that I have, which I actually have Claude's fixture. It's hard. I can't put into words exactly all of the intricacies that go into how that works, but I suspect that you've already dealt with those at a different scale. It'd just be a matter of whether or not they transfer, the same kind of, where do the wheels bind in O scale? If everything's to scale, they ought to bind in the same place, and that's going to be, the frog on the right hand side, and I believe the second set of points. They're just going to bind there. So that was the first thing that I finally figured out messing with that thing. The reason it's not working right is because the locomotive doesn't have any room to pivot inside the turnout.
There's a lot of geometry involved, but it's actually, I try to dumb it down as much as I can. I've got so many fixtures, that if somebody wants, just take, for example, somebody wants an S scale number 6Y. It's like, okay, I don't have a fixture for that, but I've got the number 6 fixture. So I make the frog out of the number 6 normal turnout fixture, and then I just take that over to a piece of paper. So now the frog is geometrically correct. I just take that over to, paper and just make a Y out of it. And, okay, it works. And I also use a lot of the free turnout templates from Fast Tracks as a reference material. Okay, well, I know where the frog is at, on this number 6 Y, where should the points be? Hey, there's a reason why they give it to us for free, and I use it. I abuse it. I take all my fixtures and I figure out a way if I can use them for something else to make it easy. I do it. There's no harm or no foul in there.
Yeah. Have you done much dual gauge?
No, I have not made a single dual gauge piece of equipment yet.
I'm getting ready to make about 6.
The caveat to that is I made an S scale number 4Y, and the customer wanted an extra rail to act as dual gauge, but it wasn't going to be actually be used. It was just for looks.
For looks.
So I did make an SN3 number 4 dual gauge, where the dual gauge was meant to be used and the standard gauge was not meant to be used, but everything was wired up as if it was 100%. So I guess I did make one freehand, but I've got jigs for the HON3 dual gauge, but I haven't physically made one yet. But
yeah, they're a lot easier than the 3-way. I'll just say that.
But I've made dual gauge. That's the most I've done in dual gauge. But I have fixtures, to do the dual gauge. I've got all the track gauges. I can do it. It's just, if that's what's needed, I'll make it. It's just how far apart do the rails need to be? It's not complicated. It's just a little bit of thinking. Mm-hmm. But
yeah, part of the problem with the narrow gauge, the HO narrow gauge 3-foot 3-way is there's no instructions at all, and the paper template clearly says right on it it's not accurate. And so there, in my opinion, like it's completely missing a PCB tie. The fixture, there needs to be another PCB tie in there that's not there. And because I can't remember now exactly where it is, but essentially it has to support your hinged points, because without it, there's just no way to get it to work that I could find. But I don't know, maybe you could.
Well, whenever I get a new fixture in from Fast Tracks, that's my prime source of tooling. It's tried and true. It meets NMRA standards. But every time I get a new fixture in, I put it through the paces. I clean it, make sure there's no flashing anywhere. I take rail and I run it from one end to the other, just to make sure that there's no, places that haven't been filed out. And, I got to do a little bit of filing to make sure that rail goes. And the other thing I've learned is not only do you want to make sure the rail just slides from one end to the other, but you want to make sure everywhere along the fixture, the rail can come straight up and straight back down. I've found fixtures where, the groove for the rail is cut more like this, and you can slide the rail in, but you can't pull it out. And just a little bit of filing clears it all up and makes it a lot better. Okay, yeah. So now I know that the rails will work in the fixture. Then I make a turnout, and while I'm making the turnout, I got the track gauge next to me, and I'm double checking everything. I've found that some places are okay with tolerances, other places are completely out of whack, and I just make a little note right there on the fixture. So when I come back to it, months later to make another turnout, I know the quirks of that fixture, and I can, I remember this fixture here, the guardrail is, it's spot on, or it's just a little bit off, so I can mentally make those changes right away. There's not a tooling that gets put into use until it's proven itself to me to make the best product for everybody.
Yeah. Well, I think we've been on for about 45 minutes now. Anything else that you need to, you want to put out or anything like that?
Just in general, I'm a one-man show. I take the orders, I process the money transfers, I build the stuff, I order the stuff, I ship the stuff. I'm a one-man show. I got the wonderful family behind me providing support, but they're not doing the work. So if you're interested in something, just reach out to me. You can go to the website. It's Empire-Trackworks. You should be able to find it fairly easy under the Contact Me tab. Just reach out to me by email with whatever crazy idea you have, and we'll talk. We'll talk about it, see what we can do, for each other. And if you do place an order with me, I will. This is a huge issue right now. Is that if you go through the website and you place an order, there's a glitch. There's a big glitch in that I'm not getting the order sent to my email. I do have a way of checking to see if there's been some kind of email delivery failure to capture those orders, so I know about them. But rest assured, I do not collect a penny from you. I'm not asking for any money when you place an order. So if you place an order, there's nothing out of your pocket until we talk about your order. All orders can be customized any way you want. Dennis, you wanted extra rail length on your number 8s for the crossover. No problem. You got it. You want the throw bar on this side and that side? No problem. You got it. I'll make it any way you want. Completely customizable. And I'll get back to you and we can discuss, the order in great detail. If you do place an order with me, I greatly appreciate it. And every Friday on the Empire Trackworks Facebook page, I try to keep everybody updated with the status of their order. So if you know your invoice order number, typically on Fridays, I like to update the status of every order, so you're informed. If you got a question about your order, call me 24 hours a day. I do not care. You call me at 2:00 in the morning because I'm probably awake anyway. And so 24 hours a day, call me if you got a question. I've got a gentleman up from Cincinnati. Hi, Al, if you're watching this. He calls me at least once a week. Even though his order is complete, he's calling me once a week about, hey, how do I wire this? Hey, how do I do this? No problem. I don't care. Call me. That's what I'm here for. Products that I do have that are uncommon is 3-way stub turnouts. Very uncommon. People just don't want to deal with them, but I make them. I make them reliably. And stub turnout, if you can order or if you can think of any conventional turnout, I'll make a stub turnout if that's what you want. So any normal turnout can be converted into a stub turnout. And stub turnouts, I've also developed what I like to call the RTDI, ready to drop in. The stub turnouts, you got one half and the other half, they need to be measured correctly towards each other so it can function properly. I've developed a system that fixes the two ends together mechanically. So the wiring is super simple. Same 3 wires, go to a stub turnout and the whole thing is 100% powered. Cool. DCC, DC, or dead rail, your choice. It's all powered. Guaranteed not to fail on that. But just go to the website, empire-trackworks.com. Look around, shoot me an email, throw me an idea. Now I'm always open for new ideas on what to do. I am working with Fast Tracks and I am working with Microengineering, where if you see something on their websites that you want, reach out to me. I got a discount. I'll pass it on to you guys and gals. I know there's some ladies out there that are in the hobby. Yeah, I'll pass on my discounts. That's not a problem. That's what I'm here for. I want to support the community.
All right. Very good. All right. Well, Alan, I really appreciate you coming on, talking about your product. I can't say enough good things about it. And don't be a stranger one of these days, and we'll try to get you on back on track some morning. We just have to work it out.
Yeah, just give me a call, Dennis. 24/7. I don't care.
Right.
Wake me up. I'll go downstairs and fire up the laptop in my pajamas and coffee and have a podcast with you.
All right. Well, we'll see everybody later. Have a good night.
One more thing. If anybody's interested, National Narrow Gauge, I'll be there. And the NASG National Convention, I'll be there. This year, 2025, I'll be there. And I'm also, I think it's Springfield, Illinois, some big train whoop-de-doo there. I'm thinking about hitting that up early in 2026. I've heard it's well worth the time, so I'm making arrangements to be there. So if you just want to see, if you're there, hey, stop by for a cup of coffee. We'll chit chat. I'm open.
All right. Okay. Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye. Go to bed, Natasha.